Today we're going to be talking about Jackal, a new top-down shooter that was released today, or February 5th if you're watching this from the future, or February 6th if you're watching this from the future and you're in Australia. Not that it really matters. The game was created mostly by a single developer, probably best known for also creating the top-down sandbox mayhem game Maniac, which I covered very briefly on this channel probably about 2 years ago now. I didn't actually know that before I chose to play Jackal, but the vibe of this game all of a sudden makes a whole lot more sense now that I'm thinking about it. In essence, Jackal is the gameplay of Hotline Miami with a presentation of I Am Your Beast set against the backdrop of the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Influences that Jackal wears honestly very proudly. As someone who is a massive fan of Miami and Beast, this does excite me. As someone who doesn't really like Fear and Loathing at all, yeah, not so much. The whole package in theory should be a recipe for success though. In reality, well, let's get into it. As always, before we get started, I should let you know that I was given a free key for this game for review purposes. While I don't believe this will affect my final conclusions when it comes to this game's quality, I will always disclose whenever I'm given something for free so you all have the information that you need to make your own decisions on that. Starting off with the gameplay, Jackal's gameplay is very reminiscent of Hotline Miami, or insert any top-down shooter that uses that same formula. It's a top-down shooter where almost all enemies are one-hit KO, but so is the player. The idea is to create a fast and fluid shooter that is also very punishing, but at the same time very satisfying to pull off. Again, Hotline Miami rules, guns you pick up only have one mag in them at most, throwing your weapon is a great tool for engaging enemies that are far away, and you need to execute finishes on any enemy you hit with a non-lethal blow. It relies on fast reaction speed and the ability to improvise quickly to succeed. Again, if you have played Hotline Miami, then you know what you're getting into. Although the way the physics work in the game, it makes it feel a little bit more sandboxy than Hotline Miami is. Where Jackal separates itself just a little bit is with the environmental design, in which there are objects in the game that you can kick into enemies. Strangely enough, I didn't find myself using the kick that much in this way, except when I tried playing the game with a controller. The game also features abilities, which you unlock by performing certain amount of finishes over the course of the game. These range from slowing down time, to having enemies have worse reaction speed, or having them all drop their weapons. Some of the later game ones are pretty fun, they change up the game a bit, like there is one in particular that turns the game to super hot for about 10 seconds. Overall, I do like the abilities. They're a good utility to try and curb the difficulty spike of the one-hit gameplay. One of the more peculiar features of the game is the ability to randomize the level seed of the levels you are playing between deaths. It wasn't something that I thought was a useful feature until I got to the level that had 6 tigers in it, which I could not beat until I changed the level seed, which made the game feel manageable. Overall, I'm not a fan of the animal enemies in the game, or the ones with giant health bars anyway. It feels like if you don't have a gun handy, then it's pretty much just game over instantly because they just hunt you down and kill you. Instantly, yeah, they just fucking kill you. But something important to note is that even though the game can feel quite unfair at times, it does this thing that all good, extremely punishing games do, by having the feature of a very quick time to restart. If you've ever played something like Super Meat Boy, again Hotline Miami does this, or I Am Your Beast, you may know that these games minimize the time spent dead to as little as possible. And this is to reduce rage, so you don't have the time to get mad at the game if you're already focused on or midway through your next attempt. It's a tiny game design decision that can make a whole lot of difference, and I really love when I see something like this. Even if the developer may not have put that much thought into why they implemented a quick restart, it at least shows a decent understanding of what makes games in this genre fun over frustrating. After I finished playing Jackal, I actually did go back and play some Hotline Miami 2 to kind of compare the two. And I think partly the reason why was, while playing Jackal, I did have Hotline Miami kind of on the mind throughout the entire playthrough. And I was kind of unsure of how I was feeling about Jackal after I'd finished it, because I felt like Jackal was pretty unfair as a game overall, but holy shit, is Hotline Miami 2 so much harder than Jackal. And while I do think that overall Hotline Miami 2 feels better to play, and that is mostly because the controls are so tightly designed, after coming back to Jackal, I realized the margin of quality was not as big of a gap as I initially thought. Jackal's controls feel a bit looser, the melee weapons have a bit more wind up, the bullet travel is slower, and the enemies are much less aimbody, which is good. But overall, I think the gameplay is solid. Moving on to the story of Jackal is what I would consider probably the weakest point of the game. The story is about a guy who I don't think we're ever given a name for, going on a drug-fueled gang killing spree throughout all of Vegas while accompanied by Anubis. Set in the 70s in Las Vegas, the similarities to the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas are very apparent. If not for the setting alone, the way the plot moves in a very incoherent and repetitive manner is definitely a strong indicator of the inspiration of the movie. A movie which I mentioned before I do not like at all for that same reason. So it's no surprise that the plot of the game isn't something that I really enjoyed, although the way the story is presented I liked a little bit more. The story is shown to us through some very stylized cutscenes, subtitles matched to the voiceover, along with mostly still kind of 3D images with styled backgrounds. There's not much animation. The style of the story is a little reminiscent of I Am Your Beast. Again, the game wears its influences on its sleeves, and the way it does that is by having one of the voice actors from I Am Your Beast in here as a main character. The vocal performance of the main character is extremely charismatic. Anubis, on the other hand, sounds a little bit goofy. He did grow on me a little bit over time, but unfortunately the vocal performances can't really save the dialogue, a lot of which I can't tell if it's meant to be tongue-in-cheek or, is taking itself a little bit too seriously. And sometimes it feels like it's just over-relying on the character talking about all the drugs that he's taking. Either way, I feel like it crosses the line of being a little bit too cringy at times. The subtitles also feel like they come out of sync a lot of the time in the cutscenes, which I don't think is intended because it feels like it takes a lot of the punch out of the stylization of the scenes. That being said, I do think the overall presentation of the story is effective, even if the dialogue and, overall story do fall a bit flat for me.
Each floor dings like another pill hitting my bloodstream. Volume at 10, acid at 11, mescaline at 12. Each number a countdown to violence. The pills do their job, dissolving the walls. I see a bloated accountant with an orbit of bikinis, holding the silver case that hasn't left his wrist since Miami.
His heart weighs heavy. Lust and lies tip the scales.
Maybe skip the moral breakdown. What's the tactical situation?
Beware of the number man's four-legged companion. I can bestow the protection spell of Osiris.
Thanks. But I've handled worse than some rich asshole's lapdog.
Those who don't learn from death are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah, well. The only thing I'm repeating is that showgirl you warned me about. Best mistake I ever made.
As for the rest of the presentation of the game, the UI looks good, the elements are easy to read and understand, menus are easy to navigate and they all make sense. One thing to point out is the spell cards though. I don't really like the layout of how they kind of overlap with each other. It makes finding the right one you want, especially towards the end of the game, a little bit annoying to sift through. I think a more linear grid layout would have worked better here, with lock spells being grayed out or something. The art style is okay overall. The enemies don't blend into the background, so that's good. I like that the enemies with guns are highlighted in red, so it's easy to identify them because they're the biggest threats in the game. That's a little neat touch that I appreciated. Moving on to the music in this game is definitely the one thing in this game I have absolutely nothing bad to say about. The soundtrack is a mix between atmospheric jazz for the main menu and the cutscenes, and some hard thumping beats for the combat. And sometimes a bit of the fusion of the two throughout the game. The electronic portions of the soundtrack are a bit out of place, I guess, if you're counting the time period of the game, but it's not something that I care about. And so I actually emailed the developer of the game about this because I was interested in the music with the game, and he told me that all of the music, with the exception of 2 tracks, were composed for the game by one person, which I think is pretty neat. I'm hoping that there will be some way to listen to the soundtrack after launch. Hint, hint. From a technical standpoint, Jackal is pretty solid. I had a solid 144 FPS throughout the entire runtime of this game with no noticeable frame drops and no crashes. There are a few very minor bugs that I ran into, mostly had to do with AI pathfinding behavior and one case of an enemy just kind of full on teleported away from me, but other than that, nothing major. While I played through this game with a keyboard and mouse initially, the game does have controller support, and although it isn't rated for Steam Deck, I thought I'd give it a try just to see how it felt, and the game played kind of much better than I expected on both. It took a while to adjust to the new control scheme, but the game feels very suited to handheld, and in particular using a controller, if that is something that you're looking to try. I think it might be sacrilegious to say, but I almost feel like I enjoyed playing the game on a controller over keyboard and mouse. It feels weird for a game like this, but honestly, I just kind of felt I was feeling it with the controller. So Jackal will be released by the time this video goes live, and the price of the game will be about $15 USD or around $20 Australian. I got through the main story of the game in about 2.5 hours, but once you complete the game, it unlocks the ability to play the game again with a whole bunch of different gameplay modifiers. Things like having the entire campaign be with randomized level seeds, randomized enemies, along with a whole slew of different gameplay modifiers, like having akimbo guns, being able to reload your guns, not having to finish enemies that are down, just a whole bunch of stuff that you can tweak the gameplay to your every desire, really. And with that, there is a decent amount of replayability to the game and gameplay, even if I don't think the story is worth experiencing more than once. Jackal is a little rough around the edges, the presentation is slick, but the story and writing don't quite hit the mark for me. But at the very least, it is able to carve out its own distinct identity. The gameplay is solid. Often when you play games that are directly inspired by another game, you'll often find that they don't understand completely what makes those games good in the first place. You know, Jackal was inspired by Hotline Miami, and as a recreation of the Hotline Miami formula, this game understands pretty well what made that game fun. But Jackal also doesn't really completely solve many of the problems that Hotline Miami had. It solves a couple. It makes the gameplay a little bit more fair on the player side, but not much else. That being said though, I think the game is pretty decent. It has some problems, but I do recommend the game overall. I think you will get more out of the game if you plan on playing through the game more than once or want to experiment with the game modifiers, and also the speedrun levels, which I forgot to mention up until this point. There are speedrun levels with a leaderboard, which are, fun little things to do. But if you're going for just a single story completion, you may feel like you aren't quite getting your money's worth with this one. So that's something to be a little bit cautious of, but overall, yes, I do recommend Jackal. And that's it. As always, thanks for watching, leave the video a like if you liked it, and subscribe if you're new. Thanks to my YouTube members for the continued support, and I will see you all next time.